So I have wanted the Canon RF 28-70 f2 lens ever since I got my Canon R6 just over a year ago now. I was always really into those f2.8 zoom lenses like the 24-70 or the 15-35, but when I found out there was an f2 28-70mm, I was hooked immediately. But when I was researching this lens, I didn't really find that much information when it came to video production. Everyone who had been using it was using it for photos, and it seemed like a fantastic photography lens. So in this video, I want to answer that specific question. Is the RF 28-70mm f2 worth it for video production? At just over $3,000 for just one lens, you want to make sure you're spending your money correctly. So without further ado, I'm going to cover the pros and cons of this lens and my experience with it over the last 6 months. So let's start off with my favorite feature, the f2 throughout the whole focal range. It's very common for the premium zoom lenses to have an f2.8 throughout their whole zoom range. However, this is the first time I've ever seen an f2, especially as it pertains to a full frame camera. Having a constant aperture throughout the whole zoom range means you can keep consistent lighting throughout you zooming in and out. Whereas those variable apertures, they'll actually get darker when you zoom in or vice versa. Having the aperture f2 also means you have an extra stop of light when compared to the f2.8 lenses. This makes the lens fantastic to use in low light situations. At a few concerts I've shot at, I've been able to keep my ISO well under 3200 at f2 during the whole performance, resulting in a cleaner image with less noise and more sharpness. And because you are at f2, you allow for a much shallower depth of field and a more beautiful bokeh behind your subjects. Many people have pointed out this is like carrying a bunch of prime lenses just in one lens between 28 and 70. Having come from the cheaper line of Canon lenses such as the 50mm f1.8, it was really nice to just have a lens that goes to f2 and have that dreamy out-of-focus look much like the f1.8, however with a much sharper image. So that leads me to my next point, image quality. Because this is an L series lens, it has extremely high quality glass and motor elements inside of it. So the images that come out of this lens are incredibly sharp, crisp, high in contrast, and have really nice colors. What's amazing is that it's sharp all around the frame, even if you shoot wide open at f2. And once again, you have this f2 throughout the whole zoom range. So the shallow depth of field you get at 70mm is absolutely beautiful. Next up, let's talk image stabilization. Funny enough, this lens actually does not come with lens image stabilization. However, if you pair up this lens with a camera body with IBIS, you can actually get up to 8 stops of image stabilization, which is actually the same amount of image stabilization that Canon reports when using the 24-70 2.8, and that lens actually has lens image stabilization. So shooting with the Canon RF 28-70mm on my Canon R6 Mark II has been nothing short of amazing. I am able to get extremely smooth handheld shots even when zoomed in all the way at 70mm. Now this is a weird point, but I think it's worth mentioning. It's how professional you look when you use this lens. There's no doubt that when you pull up to a project with this behemoth of a lens, you actually look very professional. And once you start adding things like a matte box, a rig, a microphone, a side handle, a cage, you actually look like you're running a whole cinema rig just with a mirrorless body. That impression alone is worth a lot. And I know it sounds silly right now, but trust me, when you actually do this and bring this up in professional settings, people do notice. There have been times when I've gone out to town on my normal day-to-day activities with my camera with the 28-70 attached, and people will come up and strike a conversation just because of how insane I look. And in fact, some of those conversations have actually led to paying clients. So don't underestimate the impression you leave when you have this lens on your camera body. And now let's talk about the build quality. The zoom, focus, and control ring all work perfectly and feel great to adjust. The throw is relatively short on the zoom, meaning you don't have to go a large distance to go from 28 to 70 or vice versa. The lens is weather sealed, so if you do a lot of outdoor shooting and you're in the elements, whether it be with sand, water, or otherwise, this adds another layer of protection for your gear. And if you have a body with weather sealing, then you're in a really good spot. The autofocus on this lens has been phenomenal and tracks subjects really well, even with the USM motors. And at 3 pounds, this lens is really heavy, meaning that you get a much more stable shots especially when doing handheld things with a top handle. Granted, trying to hold it steady for long periods of time may prove to be difficult. Alright, now let's cover some issues I have with this lens. Number one, its size and weight. So for those of you who do prefer a lighter setup, you'll definitely not want this lens because it weighs just over 3 pounds. So this thing gets pretty heavy on your wrists and your camera straps if you're wearing it around your neck the whole day. And even if you do just keep this in your bag, that's a lot of strain on your back because it is 3 pounds, and if you're carrying it all day, trust me, you notice it. And that's another thing, its size, because of how large it is, doesn't fit in most normal compartments for camera bags. Meaning there's usually like a little lens slot you can put your lenses, just like the 15-35 and the 70-200 that I have. However, the 28-70 is just too big for those slots, so I actually end up having to put it in a pocket inside the bag instead of just those little compartments. Definitely something to note if you're looking into this lens and you're going to be traveling with it often. It is a bit cumbersome to carry around. Number two, focus issues. I know I mentioned how the focus was amazing, but there has been a few times, I would say maybe 2 to 5% of the time, where it will just randomly struggle or hunt focus even though I have a well-lit scene with a not so fast-moving subject. I've never been able to replicate this situation, so I'm not sure what the problem is. My guess is that it doesn't do well with micro movements, and because the lens is so heavy and all the elements inside of it, I think the motor sometimes struggles and gets lost. However, it has not been a big issue. Like I said, it's maybe only happened a handful of times, and it's never ruined the shoot, although it just seems kind of jarring that it would sometimes randomly lose the subject. Number three, image stabilization. Now I know I just mentioned that if you have a camera body with IBIS, that this lens is fantastic. However, if you don't have a camera with IBIS, then you basically are SOL when it comes to image stabilization. The footage is definitely going to be shaky if you're not careful. Granted, if you're shooting on tripods or a gimbal, this won't be a big issue. However, I like to do a lot of run and gun shoots with just a top handle and a camera strap, so I'm doing a lot of handheld shots. So having the IBIS is a big plus, and not having that means that you run the risk of having much shakier footage if you're not using some other form of stabilization. Number four, large thread size. So this camera lens comes with a 95mm thread size, which is absolutely huge, and I don't think I know any other lens that comes in this size. So trying to find filters or matte boxes that fit the 95mm thread size is not hard, but it's definitely way more expensive. So because of that, that's another expense you have to take into consideration, because I would recommend getting an ND filter or a matte box to help with the f2 in bright situations. But now you're coughing up even more money on top of the $3,000 you paid for this lens. So what is the verdict? Overall, the RF 28-70mm f2 lens is a fantastic lens if you're doing video. Taking into consideration those few cons, if you have a camera with IBIS, if you're willing to invest in bigger filters that cost a little more or a matte box that costs a little more, if you can handle the size and weight and that's not a big issue, and you have a large enough camera bag to actually carry this around with you, then I actually think this lens is perfect for you. It was perfect for me. I've absolutely loved it ever since I got it, and I've just been blown away of how beautiful the images I've been able to capture with this lens and the R6 Mark II. Having that extra stop of light has allowed me to use much lower ISOs than my counterparts, and that f2 at all focal ranges gives you an extra edge compared to other people's images, because not many lenses have an f2 throughout their whole zoom range. If you're a serious videographer and you've been on the fence on this lens and you have a camera with IBIS, I would actually really recommend this one over the RF 24-70. However, it is a bit expensive, so I know it's not for everyone, and if you're not doing this for work, it may be overkill for you. And I would say that you would just stick with the 24-70 and save yourself $600-700. So if you'd like to learn more about other Canon products, you can check out my other reviews here. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you have any questions or thoughts, please leave your comments down below. I do read them and respond. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.